Hi, this is Frederick from Detroit, Berlin, a channel about gear, modular synthesizers, music production in general and other things. Welcome to this episode where I will talk a little bit and showcase the Klavis ComPair. It's a comparator, which means it gets an incoming signal. It looks at a threshold. Is the incoming voltage going above the threshold, you're getting a gate. Is it below the threshold, you're not getting a gate. You can inverse it. You can also do a window, which means you use two thresholds to create a window. Everything between the window, it will cause a gate, or if you inverse it, it will cause a gate outside of the window. You get a high and a low comparator. Two different inputs will give two different gates. Or you just use one input and it will be normalized into the second one, the B input, and then you will have two thresholds to play with and create some gates out of that. An overview of the patch I was using the ComPair from Klavis for. Got two control voltage sequencers from the Dover analog trigger sequencer going to the mix switch from Klavis, which I'm using as a switcher, a two-channel switcher in this case. You can also use more channels. This case, two-channel switcher. Did a video on that earlier, and every time the comparator is giving a gate, the sequence will switch to the other sequence. So I've got two sequencers going and the switcher is selecting which sequence that will be selected and output to my first voice. First voice, a few tip-top modules, oscillators, going through a wasp filter. Got two other voices, standard VCO sequenced by the first sequencer, and through zero VCO sequenced by the second sequencer. So you have these sequences that are constantly going and one voice that is sequenced by a combination of those two sequences chosen by the comparator, also feeding that sequence to the comparator, which means when the voltage is above a threshold, it will switch the mix, which when it is below the sequence, it will trigger a kick drum. I can kick it from skull and circuits. I'm overdriving it by the trialog, so I'm triggering it with the second, the low outcome. You can also invert those outcomes, and when you play with it, you can shift sequences, you can combine rhythms, you can make rhythms with the comparator. There's a lot going on here, but you can create these rhythms, these sequences that you otherwise probably wouldn't come up with. And there's kind of a probability to it. It's not real probability because it's going above and below a threshold. So you can run the sequence control by tweaking that comparator. It's a pretty small module, but you can do really nice things with it. Now let's listen to what I'm actually doing with this. Start really simple. I have a clock going. Clock is running the sequence. It steps through those various voltage outputs. Let's first mute it. You can do it with a ComPair. You can mute the gate so that there's no gate. So really handy of just muting it. You can also inverse it. So you twist it around. Now let's mute it. You got the input of the ComPair, and the input is the sequence going to the first voice. That's going back into the comparator to, when you go over the threshold, switch the sequence. So that's going in input 1, input A, and that's normalized to input B. You can of course use an LFO or an ADSR or any kind of input, even an audio signal, any kind. When it goes above or below a threshold, above the threshold is with input A, below the threshold is with input B, and the outcome you can invert. The sequence is going into the module, so you have a high input, and this input is kind of something you compare the A input with. So I have a mod wheel from the matriarch, and that I will run a sequence. So I muted the kick. Now I will be turning up the first voice, which is a combined sequence, and a comparator, like you can see on the oscilloscope. The comparator is giving a gate and it will be switching between those two, and I can affect it by turning up the CV with the mod wheel. So it's getting a different sequence, different combination. Can move the threshold, then you get something different, different outcome. So I'm changing that. Okay, so let's say I like this sequence, I can flip it around. Now the sequence will kind of stay the same, but different combinations of those two sequences. And if you combine that with the other voices, let's first use the second voice. Okay. So I have constantly the same sequence. This is the other sequence. The third voice. So I have combination. And they go well together because it's the same sequence, but their combinations send out to those different oscillators, and that you can do with a comparator like the ComPair from Klavis. So it's, my opinion, a useful module. It's really small, and if you have something you want to create gates from, even from incoming audio, then really handy to have it in your system. At first I was kind of confused by how you could use a comparator, because it just gives gates, gate outs, but with these gates you can trigger stuff, and when you trigger things that will have an effect on the sequence that is leading the comparator and your other modules, then you create this self-generating, almost kind of complex sequence that when you twist a knob and then it really shines, when you move the switches, negative or positive, you will really affect the way it is working. If you use a threshold, you can fine-tune, tweak it and create different patterns from fine-tuning those thresholds. And if you feed it different signals, then you can really create complex rhythms or complex patching with that comparator. So in the end, I think that is a very useful module to do something that is not the typical 4 to the floor, is a little bit not in control, but that means when something is not totally in control, you get results that you will never get. In that way, I think a comparator can be very, very useful, and yeah, it's a nice module from Klavis. It's not really complex, but it's got multiple functionalities. So to go over all the in and the outputs, you got two inputs, A and B. A is normalized to B, so that means nothing is plugged into input B. Input A is feeding also input B. Then you got a high input, which is used to compare this signal to signal A, because signal A and B are not compared to each other, they're only compared to the thresholds. And with these two knobs you set the threshold, this one for the high, for the A, this one for the low, for the B. Which means if A is going above this threshold, it's giving a gate. If it's going below, it's not giving a gate. Unless with the switches you inverse it, and when you have no gate and you inverse it, you will have a gate, and vice versa. Or in the middle you can mute it, or just normal. The other way around with B, if you input something in B, and let's put it in positive, so now the threshold is very low, B is above minus amount you're thresholding here. When B is 0, like it is now, and you're moving it above 0, the threshold, everything below the threshold is giving a gate. Of course, you can mute it or you can inverse it, so it kind of, when it's inversed, it will kind of work like channel A when it is positive. You got the window or the between switch, which means if you set the high and the low, every voltage that is in between will cause the window to output a gate. And you got the outputs, high output, the in between or the window output, and the low output. That are the controls. You need some time with the module to fully appreciate it, but when you do appreciate it, it opens up new possibilities. I made this patch which goes as follows. I have a sequence running. This sequence is feeding into the tweakers because it's an offset generator. It can do multiple things. It can amplify a signal or offset it. Also a Klavis module, really handy tool in your toolbox. So it's feeding into input B, output B with a little bit of gain and an offset, so it makes it also go below 0. You can look at the oscilloscope and you will see that whenever that sequence is going above 0, 0 is the middle line, when the sequence is going above 0, then it will have a gate. At the high output, when you switch it to the low input, it will have a gate when it's below. So the gate will be positive. Gate is always a positive signal. You can watch the LEDs, and the LEDs are active when the gate is active. And the threshold now is 0, but I can move the threshold up or I can move the threshold down. When I move it down, then it is better to amplify this a little bit, maybe move the offset. So with tweaking that, you are creating different gates. It's pretty fine control. They're small modules, If you want nothing big in your system, that's an ideal module to get. It's like a tool where you do little adjustments, then you create different outcomes, different rhythms. You can do everything what you can do with the gate, clock things, or as an input for a sequence. You can do anything what you can do with the gate. A gate is just a signal that is on or off. You can create 3 different gates. If you're feeding that to a switcher, you're feeding it different sequences like I did, or one sequence, one LFO. Let's maybe just take an LFO. So this is the sequence. The sequence, I'm taking it from an LFO. So every time it's crossing that high threshold, it's changing the gate rate. Pretty interesting way of generating rhythms, variations of melodies, trigger different stuff, switchers, you can trigger so much. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. You can follow the affiliate link to buy the Klavis ComPair. A comparator is always nice to have in your system, so I'm very happy with this one. And yeah, it feels nice. It is small, it doesn't take up too much space, and it really fits in nice with the other modules from Klavis. If you don't like how the black and silver panel looks, they also have it in a fully black version. So if your system is black, then you can have a black version. Also with the other modules, the flex shaper, tweakers and the mix switch and their other modules, they also have it in black. I prefer this, but like I say, if you have a black system, they also have it in black. Let's create another patch. I came up with the following patch, which is kind of a soundscape. So the complex envelope generator is in a cycle with positive and negative outcomes. This is feeding into the oscilloscope, then it's going into the ComPair from Klavis, which means it's giving a gate and it's not giving a gate depending on how the settings are and depending on how the threshold is on the ComPair. So I have these different outputs, which one of them is triggering the analog sequencer from Dover. This sequence is sample and hold by triggering it with a gate from the ComPair, and the gate from the ComPair is triggering a native instrument's elements, and the sequence is controlling the pitch of that element. Then I also have a gate that is controlling the Can I Kick It from Skull and Circuits. There's kind of a lot going on, pretty simple, yet I need that sample and hold to move the sequence and keep it at a set value for as long as the gate is output from the ComPair. So it's pretty complex, but I will let you hear how it sounds, and it sounds, I think, pretty interesting. So let's go. This is the Can I Kick It with modulation on the pitch of the one of the 2 oscillators in there. So it's kind of a melodic kick drum that sometimes will be low and sometimes a chirping sound. Very versatile unit. And then you have the soundscape of the elements. Maybe give it a little bit delay on the matriarch. So when I tweak this sequence or I move it to AD, just changing the speed and everything. So it's very subtle, I can tweak it without destroying it. Has different outcomes, so the comparator will work differently. Make it complexer. It's different. I can totally change it by just moving a parameter. When I play with the threshold, it's also changing everything in a subtle way. So it's getting really slow, different. And this middle outcome, it's triggering the bass drum. So it's just using a few knobs and switches, you totally change the pattern, the speed, the soundscape is totally becoming something else. Of course in the same timbre, because the timbre I'm not modulating, but I could do that. Let's try something. Maybe I destroy it, maybe not. So let's put something in the high input, which means I will be comparing that to the input A. And let's just, yeah, maybe this one. And it also totally changes how it works. Move a few switches. Totally changes how the sequence is built. Gets more complex, more itchy, I would say. You can go into the non-musical territory with this. You can do it all. So I think that is really worth a look into. Klavis ComPair. In my opinion, it's a really nice module. I have the flex shaper, the mix switch. These are really my favorite ones. The tweakers is just, yeah, a tool, but like in this video, I wanted to show something, I needed to offset something, and that tweakers, it's really close by. I can take it, I can offset something. It's really helpful to do things that you otherwise wouldn't be able to if you don't have an offset generator. You sometimes, yeah, you're very limited, and these kind of modules like this tweakers and this compare, that comparator, they open up your system in a way that you otherwise wouldn't use it. I would like to thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please give it a like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I have some affiliate links in the description. So if you're interested in one of those Klavis modules, just follow the link and the channel will get a little percentage, but it will not cost you anything more. Your support means so much to me. Give it a try, I would say, and yeah, if you have any more questions about this module, just leave it in the comment section and yeah, I will get back to you. So hope to see you next time. Bye bye.